Dean Arnold.
All right. Dean Arnold Podcast, August 21st. Here we go. We're going to have us a podcast today. We're going to talk about the scriptures, the saint of the day, and other things. Like, share, and subscribe. DeanArnoldForCongress.com is where you give to my campaign, where you can vote for me in November. I'm bringing sanity to an insane world. The Russians may be more sane or more insane than we are, depending on how you look at it and your perspective. But today we're going to talk about separation of church and state Russian style, which is a lot different than American style. It's different in both ways. In some ways, there's more interaction and working with separation in church and state, and then in some ways, they're much more separated. You believe it? At least they were in early 1900s during the Russian Revolution, much more separated than America would ever be. Oh, yeah. We could use some Russian version of separation of church and state in our country. Anyway, we'll talk about it. I'll explain it to you. Long story short, the Russian church did not endorse the army that was opposing the God-hating, atheistic, horrible, bloody Bolsheviks, because they didn't believe the church should be involved in such issues. And we'll talk about it, and it's very interesting. Okay, let's get to the saint of the day. Before we do that, let's have some fun with Fear the Beard. All right. We had a ZZ Top member die this week, so he's getting honored there. They said the drummer, and the drummer gets featured there, so that's kind of nice. All right, let's okay. I got to remove that. Yeah, there we go. Scripture of the day, 2 Corinthians 7. For godly sorrow produces repentance leading to salvation, not to be regretted, but the sorrow of the world produces death. We're not going to get into all that, but if you remember Judas, so we'll bring Judas up in a minute. Judas was sorrowful after he sold Christ out for 30 pieces of silver, and he felt bad about it, and but it wasn't leading to repentance. It was an ungodly sorrow. And I think it's all I'll mention for this right now. This whole passage is about how they had this guy in their congregation that was in sin, sleeping with his mother-in-law. And Paul rebukes them for not kicking him out, and they kick him out. And Paul's is like incredibly affirmative for them for doing that. But then he's like, this is like the second time he said, hey, now that he's repented, you got to accept him back. That's really, really important. And that's all good. I think the one other thing I wanted to mention about this passage is that the great sin here was this guy that was sleeping with his mother-in-law. However, knowing the ancient world, I'm not so sure that it was the sleeping part that was the big sin. I think it was his mother-in-law. In other words, he was disrespecting his father. And the father may have been dead. I don't know, but it doesn't matter. In these ancient cultures, you did not disrespect the father like that. Now, I was in Korea one time, and it's like, if like the pastor had an affair, it's like, we don't like that. But if they heard that the pastor had cussed out his father, it'd be like, oh, horrible scandal. So in old world cultures, they think a little bit differently. So I'm not sure. Somebody who's a Bible scholar could look into this for me. We might not know. We might not have the ability to know. But I think the big scandal was not so much sex as it was disrespecting his father. Anyway, Mark chapter 2 is the gospel of the day. They want to know, the Pharisees, disciples of John, the Pharisees, were fasting. And they come to Jesus. They say, why do the disciples of John and the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast? Jesus basically says, I'm here right now. I'm the bridegroom. So why would the bride fast? We're all together. It's all good. No need to fast. But there's going to come a day when I'm going to be taken away and everybody's going to fast. So it's just a reminder that fasting is still a thing for us at this point in time in history. There's a whole thing about unshrunk cloth on garments and new wine into old wineskins. And I've read that passage again and again for many, many, many years. Never quite understood it. Once in a while, I'll get a preacher who does a good job with it, but it doesn't matter. The main point of that passage is we are still fasting because Jesus is no longer with us. Saint of the day, Apostle Thaddeus of the 70. Okay, before we dive into St. Thaddeus, remember that Jude, one of the 12, who also wrote a book in the New Testament, he also went by the name Thaddeus. We're not talking about him. This Thaddeus is one of the 70. So Jesus had 12 disciples, and then when he wanted to get larger, he had his 70 disciples. What do you know about those 70 disciples? Well, not much, because of sola scriptura. But if you follow tradition, you get to know a lot about these guys. So this Thaddeus, one of the 70, he came on the scene listening to John the Baptist, John the Forerunner. He got baptized by John the Baptist. And then he heard about Christ, and he came, and he was one of the 70 disciples that were sent out 2 by 2 by Christ, who went out and cast out demons and healed people and that sort of thing. And after the ascension, he went into Syria and Mesopotamia, preached the gospel in Edessa, and he converted King Agbar and the people and the pagan priests to Christ. Now, this is significant because Edessa is known in some accounts as the first Christian city, the first sort of governmental, civil government entity to convert officially to Christ, Edessa. And Thaddeus is the one who did that early work. There's some later work where Agbar the Ninth officially converts the city as well. So we're not sure if this is early work or the big work, but I'd say early work. Then he went to the city of Beirut in Lebanon to preach, and he founded a church in Lebanon. And it was in this city that he peacefully died in the year 44. The place of his death is indicated as Beirut in the Slavonic Manaean. But according to other sources, he died in Edessa. So could go either way. St. Thaddeus, after various tortures, was beheaded by sword on December 21st in the Armenia region, according to Armenian tradition. So got a couple of traditions there. That's okay. St. Thaddeus, one of the 70. Get to know about some of these people you never got to know about. It's like Christmas, isn't it? Okay. Let's talk about separation of church and state, Russian style. This is all about how the patriarch, the head of the Russian church, acted during the Russian Revolution. So I'm going to tell you about him. His name was, he took the name Tikhon. As before that, it was, I think, Vasily. I forget his last name, but he was a devout, godly Russian young man. And he went to seminary, became a bishop's assistant. He was so good that they made him a bishop at age 32. When the canon law says you have to be 33, they preceded it by 6 months. They loved him so much in his, remove that. They loved him so much where he was a bishop in Russia that when they decided to move him, which people didn't like, hold on a second. I'm trying to bring up a thing here. And I think I'm about to succeed. Yes, I am. Very good. So they, you should be able to see this now. No? Yeah. So when they moved him from Russia over to the United States, which was sort of stationed in Alaska, but he ended up spending a lot of time in New York, San Francisco, maybe even Miami. I'm not sure. But the Northeast certainly. But they loved him so much in that part of Russia that when it was time to go, they protested like, "No, don't take our bishop. This is the best bishop ever." He would meet with everybody anytime, all the time, and he had a great sense of humor, and he was gentle and kind. And they laid down on the train tracks so that the train couldn't leave. They loved him so much. But eventually the hierarchs got their way, and they moved this Bishop Tikhon to Alaska and New York and the Northeast and San Francisco in the United States of America, where he was also quite popular and accomplished a lot of things. There he is as a young man, Tikhon. And he united a lot of the Orthodox jurisdictions while he was Bishop of America. Founded St. Tikhon's seminary and monastery in eastern Pennsylvania. What else we got here? That's him on the right, the far right, kind of a tall guy in front. And he's meeting with some bunch of bishops in America. This is in Wisconsin. I've got no other backstory on that. Let me show you a few more pictures of Tikhon since we're doing this. That's a classic picture of him. That's a real photograph. He was tall, handsome, blonde when he was young. That's his icon. Oh, by the way, one of the reasons I know so much about this guy and the reason I want to talk about him is my church in Chattanooga is called St. Tikhon Orthodox Church. We're named after Tikhon. And so his icon, every time we walk into church, the first thing we see is the icon of Tikhon. We actually got a little relic, which is a bit of his bones. That's a whole weird thing that I haven't gotten to yet. I don't think some of you are ready for it yet. But anyway, we got an icon of Tikhon we see, and he's up on the iconostasis, Mary, Christ, John the Baptist, and then the far left, Tikhon. So yeah, Tikhon is my church patron, and I followed him a lot, and I've studied him a lot, and I've written a little bit about him because of that. But that's his icon. Here's another image that is sort of a doctored image of an old photo. So he looks kind of cool and modern there. But that was, that's fine. So here's him young and old. Anyway, they love him in America, but they call him from America back to Russia. Next thing you know, he's elected Metropolitan of Moscow because everybody loves him so much. And then they have an election for patriarch. That's the head dog of the whole thing. And to some people's shock, Tikhon was elected because he was meek and mild and loved and cared for. He was no wimp, though, as we're about to find out. So, Tikhon. Those are the pictures. Let's get back to that, this thing here. Okay. Kind of before he was executed, or right around the time that they were killing people, killing the royal family in America in 1918 or so, they would come to find him, and during the evenings they would find him walking around his garden, which had high walls surrounding it. Children would perch there on the high walls, and Tikhon was always ready to greet his friends with apples and candy, and they would have long conversations. That's the kind of guy he was. And where I got this information says that wasn't a stretch or a piece of propaganda. That's just the kind of guy he was. He was loved everywhere. But he was also able to be pretty rough with the evildoers. Here's one of his pronouncements. Reports reach us daily concerning the astounding and beastly murders of wholly innocent people. All this fills our heart with a deep and bitter sorrow and obliges us to turn to such outcasts of the human race with stern words of accusation and a warning. As the Paul says, call these people. All right. He would perform services in churches whenever possible, traveling tirelessly on foot or in a humble carriage. He was made an honorary U.S. citizen. When a guy traveled to Russia and asked him as patriarch, what can we do to help you? He said, send us Bibles. He said, the Russian people have never been hungrier for Bibles. Send us Bibles. This is when the atheists are killing everybody, outlawing Christianity. I told you I was going to mention Judas Iscariot. One of the first things the Bolsheviks did when they took power is they put up in Moscow a statue of Judas Iscariot. I mean, these were the worst of the worst. I've seen some stuff lately where they're saying that everything that you were told about the Nazis was a projection onto the Nazis of what the Bolsheviks did, which was much worse, which is true. They put up a statue of Judas Iscariot. They were so anti-Christ, so anti-God, slaughtered the royal family, their 4 beautiful daughters. I mean, just murderous, vile, venal, anti-Christ, apostate. I mean, evil. I don't have enough words. Tikhon, meanwhile, was always ready with a joke, and he wasn't scared of the Bolsheviks, even though they're always trying to kill him. But they never quite killed him because they were scared of the people. He traveled to the front line during the war, First World War, and he did services for the soldiers while under bombardment. He was given a military award for his distinguished services. As he was made patriarch, a procession of clergy and laymen in 3 different cities was cut down by machine gunners. So Tikhon knew what he was getting into. He said it's going to be terrible. Okay, here's where we get to the meat of what I want to talk about today. I think I'll try to bring this up. So we're in the middle of the Russian Revolution. The Bolsheviks have taken over this godless, terrible regime that I just told you about, Judas Iscariot statue. And so now we're in a revolution in Russia, and the good guys have formed an army. It's called the White Russian Army. You got the Red Russians, the Bolsheviks, and you got the White Russians. And we got a war. And obviously we want the White Russians, who support the Tsar and support Christianity and are trying to fight all this evil. We want them to beat the Red Russians, who are atheistic, murderous, Christ-hating, terrible excuses for human beings. But Tikhon, who was the patriarch of the church, would not endorse the White Russian Army. He would not bless it. He would not say that the White Army is of God and the Red Army is not of God. He said the church is not supposed to be involved in this. He did not condemn anyone who became a White Russian, supported the White Russian Army. He said this is something for the people to decide. This is the people's issue, not the church's issue. And he would not condemn anybody who was a White Russian and fought in the White Russian Army. That was what their conscience caused them to do, but he would not bless it officially in a church capacity. And he got it from both sides. The Reds hated him because he was a Christian. The Whites hated him because he wouldn't formally bless the White Russian Army. Well, that Civil War lasts 2 or 3 years. I'm not enough of an expert on what happened in the Russian Civil War. But the Reds finally beat the Whites. This is a quote from Tikhon. The establishment of any particular form of government is not the work of the church, but of the people themselves. So He said he was less concerned about the collapsing political situation, which could only lead to physical death. And he was far more concerned. There was this movement called the Living Church, which was basically a big liberal false church that was trying to corrode everything that the Russian Orthodox Church stood for. And he was much more concerned about that because that's spiritual corruption that could last for an eternity. The physical corruption of the state, it can only lead to physical death. So here's a guy. He also at some point said, I really don't care about my name. See if I can find that quote. I think it's coming up next. He got stabbed by some crazy woman like 7 times, but he had on a couple garments, so it didn't kill him. But anyway, I don't want to lose my thought before. He didn't care about his own name. He didn't expect, he thought his name would be pilloried in history because the Reds hated him, the whites hated him, but he was trying to do the right thing. He had no idea that 70 years later, the Soviets would collapse and that he would be made a saint in the Orthodox Church. But he made hard choices and did good, solid, courageous things during his tenure. He died in 1824. We'll get to that briefly. Here's a story. He had 18 of his fellow clergymen were called to trial because they wouldn't sell or give up the golden utensils that were used for the Eucharist. And this is basically on Tikhon's instructions. They gave away the buildings, their lands, all sorts of other things, pretty things in the church and pieces of furniture and that kind of. They gave all that away to the Reds, but they wouldn't give up these little golden utensils they used for the Eucharist. They said that's sacred. We can't do that. And so these 18 clergymen were put on trial to be executed for not doing that. And they put Tikhon on the stand. They said, we want you to tell your fellow clergymen to give up these utensils so we can help the poor, is what they said, which was not true. Documents have shown later that was a ruse. But Tikhon stood up, crossed himself, and looked at all his 18 fellow clergymen and said, I bless you to your deaths. And they fell on their knees, and they were led out, and they were saying, they were shouting, Christ is risen. And there was a large crowd following that said, indeed, he is risen. And all these people were executed. Gripping stuff, man. Hundreds of bishops and thousands of priests were martyred, probably a lot larger than that. Of course, the royal family, Tikhon said, let my name perish in history, only that the church might live. He cared about the reputation of the church, and he was not going to do what would seem like a proper and healthy military alliance. We do that a lot of military alliances going on in America with the religious people. The Presbyterians were famous in the American Revolution for endorsing the revolutionaries. So a lot of church and state non-separation going on then. And we got a lot of non-church and state separation going on now with the good old evangelicals and Christian Zionist types. But Tikhon, the head of the Russian church, would not endorse either military. We'll let that sink in. But Tikhon was no pushover for the Reds. Here's what he said. Recall yourselves, ye senseless, and cease your bloody deeds. For what you are doing is not only a cruel deed, it is in truth a satanic act for which you will suffer the fire of Gehenna, that's hell, in the life to come, beyond the grave, and the terrible curses of posterity in this present earthly life. You're going to suffer this life, the next life. You're going to go into hell forever. You're cruel. You're satanic. Okay, he didn't hold anything back. These are part of what are called anathemas, and he did some anathemas on the Reds. So they hated him. So he wouldn't endorse the White Army, but he would definitely anathematize and curse the Red Army big time. He was no wimp. They didn't kill him because they were afraid of the people, but he probably preferred that they would have killed him because they did all this kind of psychological torture on him. This one torturing agent tried to get him to sign a document to send to Britain's Archbishop of Canterbury, assuring that the Western world that there was no persecution of Christians in Russia. Sign this document so that the Western world thinks that there's no persecution of Christians in Russia. Tikhon wouldn't do that. So they kept psychologically torturing him. They promised that they could send him down to the south on the beach where he could retire, take care of his health. He said no. They tried to bribe the patriarch with promises of increased privileges for the church, canceling prison sentences for his fellow churchmen. Tikhon said no. All these things were very tempting for him. He didn't care about himself, but he cared about all his people. But it still wasn't right. And so they kept psychologically torturing him. By March 25th, 1925, he finally reposed. He crossed himself twice, saying, "Glory to thee, O God, glory to thee, O God, glory." And then he stopped right there and he died. Patriarch Tikhon Bulavin. Questions and comments, welcome. Don't have any yet. I'm running for Congress. Vote for me. DeanArnoldForCongress.com is where you give your donations. Like, share, and subscribe. Bringing sanity to an insane world. An insane world where the followers and the leaders of God and his church make formal alliances with the militaries. Not supposed to do that. Or I don't know. At least you're not supposed to do it in Tikhon's time. I'm not sure how they do it now because the patriarch and Putin are pretty nip and tuck. Which I personally don't have a problem with. That's another podcast for another day. Thousands of people came to Tikhon's funeral. 150,000, long line. But he was a major figure in the whole Russian Revolution, and he refused to use the church to endorse the military. He paid the price for it, but ultimately he was made a saint. So a good man in that sense. And so today is August 21st, and no comments. So I think I'm going to head on out of here, but I enjoyed it. And separation of church and state arguably is heated more in Russia than in America. I know that freaks some of y'all out, but hey, the truth is the truth. Here we go.
Dean Arnold.
August 21st.